Welcome, Marvel fans. Thank you for joining me for another breakdown review of an episode of WandaVision, this time episode 6, and I only have one big complaint about this episode to kick things off. It was way too short. But let's go ahead and start to dive on deep into it. If you haven't already, take a quick moment to hit that subscribe and notifications bell so you don't miss out on any future breakdown reviews or anything else that we got going on in this channel. So the episode begins by immediately throwing us into an intro that is very inspired by Malcolm in the Middle, right down to the text they use for the character names. Every episode so far, with the exception of episode 4, has been set in a particular decade, beginning with episode 1 set in the 50s, and this episode seeming to have jumped to the early 2000s, as not just the intro, but the format of a good chunk of the episode is in Malcolm in the Middle theme style. The one thing that threw me for a loop in the intro was the fact that Agnes was included and thrown in there like she was part of the family to some degree, which is odd considering she hasn't been included in any of the intros prior to this point and doesn't necessarily play a large role in this episode. Whatever. Then the character intro I was personally looking forward to the most, Pietro Maximoff, portrayed by none other than Evan Peters, who we first had revealed / introduced to us in the previous episode. I have been dying to see the relationship between him and Wanda, given the apparent circumstances of him being her brother from another universe. Or is he? And the impact he would have on the other characters, and oh how they did not disappoint. After the intro, we follow Billy as he's discussing the fundamentals of Halloween directly into the camera, just like Malcolm in the Middle, which I found to be entertaining, but equally as confusing. Are Wanda's children aware their mom is broadcasting their lives into a sitcom being viewed by who knows who? Are they okay with that? How much of an understanding of everything do they even have? Aren't they like, what, a week old depending on how long it's been since the last episode? I'll restrain myself for now. So the twins enter the living room to see their uncle asleep on the couch, and it's made clear right away that Tommy very much admires his mother's brother, and it seems Billy's a little more unsure of what to think. Pietro dashes up off the couch to give his nephews a good old spook and runs around the room showing off his incredible speed. Now I couldn't help noticing that the special effects around his super speed are the same effects used on Aaron Taylor Johnson's version of the character, which of course is no surprise as this show and Age of Ultron are obviously both made by Marvel, but I point this out because it's one more sign that something isn't entirely as it seems here, unless I'm looking too far into this part. Quicksilver in the X-Men films more or less pops around, almost as if he's teleporting, leaving only a small gust of wind behind him, whereas the Quicksilver we see in the second Avengers film leaves a bluish streak that dissipates behind him as he wisps through the landscape that he's navigating. Now I know this was done as a way for the studios to separate and differentiate their two versions of the same character, but maybe this points to the Quicksilver we're seeing now not actually be the Quicksilver from the X-Men universe. Or perhaps he's a Quicksilver from a third different universe altogether, and he just so happens to resemble the one we met in Days of Future Past. But I have a hunch at this point that this is something leading to the inclusion of the demon Mephisto, as I hinted at in my previous review, and I'll actually wait to speak more on that for now, as more examples of this will come up later. Okay, so back to Pietro and the twins, who after running around a bit, see Wanda come down the stairs in a delightfully tasteful and amateur interpretation of her comic book accurate costume. Like, the type of version you would find at a pop-up Spirit Halloween store for way more than you want to spend. Billy guesses that she's an old Red Riding Hood, but Wanda claims to be a Sokovian fortune teller, and Tommy thinks she looks rad, until Uncle Pietro thinks it's lame, then Tommy thinks it's lame too. I'm an uncle myself, so I really got a kick out of the way Tommy looks up to Pietro. I thought it was adorable. Then Pietro does exactly what I was hoping for, which is make a reference to their past as siblings, and it had elements of what I expected to, as it ends up flashing back to a memory of Wanda and Pietro trick-or-treating as children. Yet, Wanda doesn't seem to recall the events going that way, but Pietro brushes it off, claiming she must have suppressed a lot of the trauma. Billy turns to the camera to then inform us that Wanda has been acting weird ever since Uncle Pietro arrived. Next down the stairs is Vision, who is also donning a very let's get creative with what we have in the house type of comic book costume, and Wanda shows her clear signs of appreciation that he's willing to look so ridiculous. But he gives a cold reply by stating there were no other clothes in his closet, seeming to hint at the mistrust between them has gotten worse, only to shrug it all off as a joke, and he lightens up as he tells Wanda to have fun with the kids because he is on neighborhood watch duty for the evening. And this news doesn't sit well with Wanda. She begins to tell Vision that's not what he's supposed to do, but he cuts her off, and she kind of realizes by saying it like that, she's admitting to controlling the reality they're living in, so she defaults to getting upset because he didn't tell her he had plans. Logical fallback there. Then we get another line spoken directly into the camera by Billy about how mom and dad have been different lately. But what's particularly interesting about this cutaway is that Pietro seems to have taken notice to Billy as he's talking to the audience, giving a curious and confused look, which is surprising since it seems the only ones who are aware of that fourth wall interaction are the twins. Again, could be looking too far into it. Who knows? Wanda continues to grow more upset due to it being Tommy and Billy's first Halloween, at 10 years old, but Pietro steps in to put the married couple at ease and offer his support in getting the night going so Vision can take off. But before he does, he tells Wanda in a light but serious tone to be good, playfully insinuating that he's still aware of the funny business she's got going on. Upon his exit, Wanda locks the door and turns around only to be terrified by Pietro, who snuck up and put on a freaky face of sorts. Now this seems to initially come off as a lighthearted way of a brother messing with his sister, but I don't think it was intended to be as simple as that. Once again, one more thing I could be looking too far into, we're on a roll here, but I think it's one more small element that adds to the argument of this Pietro maybe not being as familiar as we thought he was. Wanda acknowledges that Pietro doesn't even have a costume, so he takes a hold of Tommy and sprints away to return a moment later with the both of them dressed in a just as cheesy as the rest version of Quicksilver's costume from the comics. Shift gears over to the fancy tech tents of S.W.O.R.D. where we get a chance to see everyone going bonkers over Wanda's new red paint job on the Hex, and Director Hayward walking by the 80s drone, zapped by Wanda in the previous episode, demanding a full report on it, of course. Following directly behind him is Monica Rambeau, who is a bit on the infuriated side that the director decided to ruffle Wanda's feathers by shooting at her via the drone. A couple of bickering comments are thrown in by all, including Darcy and Jimmy, which boils down to Director Hayward jumping to the conclusion that they need to eliminate Wanda, so this whole thing goes away. And this next bit momentarily brought so much legitimate logic to the table that I had to give the writers a bit of praise here, as Monica firmly states that no one truly knows what would happen inside or outside the Hex if Wanda dies. Thank you. Just thank you, Mr. Jumping to Conclusions over here. So many movies or shows the main guy in charge like this sees or hears about a threat and is just like, welp, I guess we gotta kill it. Director Hayward refuses to budge on his opinion, however, or surrender to the what seems to be impending doom of the Hex, and gives Monica a hard time for standing up for superpowered individuals, revealing that he's aware of her past with Carol Danvers. But, didn't she just, have a problem with Captain Marvel even being mentioned in the last episode and immediately dismissed her? I didn't realize that's what standing up for someone is. I'm not kidding. There better be some resolution to the comments and actions thrown in here regarding Captain Marvel, because the little there is doesn't seem to be lining up so far. Does Monica like her or not? When did Monica, if she ever, defend or stand up for Captain Marvel in the past that Hayward would be aware of? Whatever. So Director Hayward has security escort Monica, Darcy, and Jimmy off of the premises, and we're treated to a pleasant surprise of action where Monica and Jimmy beat the hell out of the S.W.O.R.D. agents, while Darcy stands to the side in shock and awe as she was rather unaware of the planned attack at hand. They throw on some S.W.O.R.D. gear and head back into the camp undercover. Cut back over to Westview where the streets are filled with trick-or-treaters, and Billy and Tommy are off to the races to stock up on candy. As they run off, Pietro yells out, "Unleash hell, demon spawn!" which is sign number however many at this point of Mephisto having some sort of a role in all this. I'm just going to throw this out there before I go any further. My current guess is that this Quicksilver is simply Mephisto in disguise, deciding to take on the persona of Wanda's brother knowing she would open up to him and let him in. Why would Marvel's version of the devil do such a thing, you ask? My only logical deduction is that something must have happened to diminish his power some time ago, and he's using Wanda as a means of refueling himself by siphoning her magic in a way. There's also still the looming factor of the twins' existence. In one of the comics, they are revealed to be shards of the soul of Mephisto that Wanda unintentionally used to create them. Perhaps this is Mephisto's way of luring Wanda back in so he can get those shards of his soul back. Don't worry. This isn't the last clue. There's literally another one coming up right now. Wanda goes about delicately interrogating Pietro by asking if he remembers the name of a kid they grew up with, and it's very noticeable throughout this mini conversation that the behavior and choice of wording is interesting, to say the least. Quicksilver acknowledges that he looks different, and Wanda's like, yeah, what's up with that? And his response is oddly peculiar when he mentions that if he found Shangri-La, he wouldn't want to be reminded of the past either, speaking on Wanda being more distraught if she would have seen her actual brother. Though that logic kind of instantly falls flat, because if that's the case, then why does Vision look the same? It's also worth noting real quick that Shangri-La is allegedly a real place in the Marvel comics, and it's claimed it was discovered by Vision once he uncovered the secrets of life and death, gave himself immortality, and pledged to keep the secret hidden there. But who knows if they're going based off that at all. Tommy strolls back up, wanting to head over to the next house, and Uncle Pietro offers to help increase the pace at which the twins get their candy, to which Tommy responds with, "Kick ass!" and the three dart off. Wanda then repeats, kick-ass. And this could easily be taken as a bit of a surprise on her end that she just heard her kid say a word she doesn't approve of, but it's clearly a nice little nod to the movie Kick-Ass that Evan Peters and Aaron Taylor-Johnson both appeared in. So Wanda's left alone, but she sees Agnes's husband Herb receiving an update on neighborhood patrol, and there's a funny series of moments where Quicksilver and the twins run about the neighborhood, taking all the candy, smashing all the jack-o'-lanterns, and covering everyone in silly string. Herb apologizes as he has to go look after the situation, but Wanda throws in that Vision could help. But Herb confirms that Vision's not on duty tonight, leaving Wanda baffled. Then Herb straight up asks Wanda if she wants something to be changed, which is like, okay, so do you know what's happening here? And to yourself, or what? But Wanda unconvincingly says it's fine. Finally, we get a chance to see what Vision's up to, and he's strolling along by himself down a part of town that is full of some unusual activity. Sure, there's some kids running around as expected, but there's also things like a woman stuck in a small loop of going back and forth between hanging some decorations with an emotionless stare on her face, and upon a closer look, we see a teardrop run down her cheek as she remains just as emotionless. Weird. Vision definitely takes notice of this, but continues onward towards the outskirts of Westview to dive further into this mystery. We then are presented with undoubtedly the creepiest commercial of any that have been shown in previous episodes. A young boy in claymation is stranded on a small island who complains about his overwhelming hunger, when a shark with a surfboard appears and hands him a cup of Yo Magic yogurt. The problem is, the boy is unable to open the container, and as the days quickly drift by, the boy slowly fades away into skeletal remains of what he started as, bringing the commercial to a close with the tagline, Yo Magic, the snack for survivors. Now, I have come across a slew of different interpretations of what this commercial could really mean, some of them believable, and others are more than beyond ridiculous. And I myself don't even know what to fully take away from it. But I will say the most thought-provoking theory I stumbled upon was one explaining that all the commercials are representations of the Infinity Stones, which I honestly think it may be worth doing a whole video on that. Let me know in the comments if you'd like to see that and what you thought this commercial was really trying to say. Back on over to Westview, where it is now nighttime, and we see the dressed up Maximoffs, minus Vision of course, walking past a theater that happens to be playing The Incredibles, a movie about a family of superheroes, and The Parent Trap, a movie about twins who discover each other after being separated at birth and attempt to switch places to try and get their parents back together. And I just enjoy how the smallest of details are paid so much attention to with the trivial specifics like that. So it's visibly clear that the twins are upset as Pietro complains to Wanda about forcing them to return the stolen candy from earlier, and Wanda just can't believe what a bad influence he's becoming. But Pietro claims he's just doing his part by coming to town unexpectedly, creating tension with the brother-in-law, stir up trouble with the Rugrats, and ultimately give her grief, as he asks her confirmation that that's what she wanted. Then there's a fantastic exchange about what happened to each of their accents, which I laughed out loud at given the fact that I had spoken on that exact subject in my previous breakdown review. Pietro mentions that details are fuzzy, but he knows he got shot in the street and then heard Wanda calling him, so he came. Which is awfully interesting and puzzling, as it seems to be yet another detail that makes it difficult to decipher just exactly what version of Quicksilver we're dealing with here. If he is the one from the X-Men universe, then he sure as hell wouldn't remember being shot in the street, unless that Quicksilver had an off-screen death in similar fashion. But then we get distracted by Tommy and Billy, who discover the next street over has full-size candy bars, and every kid that has ever gone trick-or-treating knows that that's the big leagues, and when they call you, you better go. This leads to quite the surprise though, as suddenly Tommy displays the same super speed that his uncle has. This could go a couple of different ways now, folks. Tommy and Billy's comic book counterparts are Speed and Wiccan respectively, and end up becoming part of the Young Avengers. So, if these kids are actually real and not a figment of Wanda's imagination, then we might be getting our first look at the adolescent superhero lineup. Or it could end up being that Mephisto thing I keep circling back around to. Wanda tells Tommy to take it slow, to which he responds like any kid who just discovered they had super speed would, and runs around until he's stopped and forced to bring his brother with him. So long as they don't go past Ellis Avenue. Wonder if we're gonna see what that's all about. Cut back once more to the fancy tech tents. My goodness, there's a lot of them. Monica, Darcy, and Jimmy pop inside one, pass by a TV playing Wanda's sitcom, and Monica questions who the new castmate is and finds out it's Pietro with a different face. Darcy makes easy work of hacking into Sword's system and realizes Hayward has found a way to look through the boundary and track Vision, as well as display any nearby resonance. And Jimmy points out that there seems to be something wrong with the resonance near the border. Perfect transition to Vision, who is closing in upon the border of Westview himself. In this section of town, no one is moving or talking. The lights are just flickering on and off, and there's just an eerie feeling about the whole setting. It doesn't take long for Vision to admit to himself that things have gotten too weird, and he phases out of his Halloween costume and into his true form. He flies up to get a better view of the town and can hear bits and pieces of the abundance of chatter throughout, and for what it's worth, I found that moment to be very Superman-like. It was pretty cool. And he sees a car sitting in place at a stop sign, so he flies over to it, and who else is in the car but their favorite neighbor, Agnes. But Agnes isn't exactly herself, as she seems to have little to no emotion and claims to have made a wrong turn and gotten lost. So Vision does his mind trick he did to Norm in the preceding episode, and the real Agnes wakes up startled as can be, instantly recognizing Vision as one of the Avengers and asks if he's here to help. Vision states that he does want to help, but he's also unaware of what an Avenger is, and Agnes thinks perhaps this is because he's dead. Geez, spoil things much, Agnes? Vision's like, look, I don't know what you're talking about, but I just want to get out of here and see what's going on with the people outside. Agnes laughs like the Halloween witch she's dressed up as, and Vision puts her back into the miserable mind-warped reality they've all come to hate. Vision makes a promise to fix things, though, and good old back-to-regular Agnes makes a U-turn to drive back into Westview when it's then revealed to us that the stop sign she was sitting at is at the crossing of Ellis Avenue. Hey, I knew we were going to find out what that was about. So Vision marches forward and we cut back over to Monica and the crew. Monica claims to have a contact that can help her get back into the Hex, so they go to meet up with whoever it is, when suddenly Darcy pulls up Monica's blood results and explains that her cells have been rewritten on a molecular level twice, having already gone in and back out of the Hex. This is unmistakably foreshadowing the introduction of Monica gaining superpowers, as her comic book equivalent does. In the comics, Monica Rambeau becomes an energy-blasting superhero named Spectrum, or Photon, or even Captain Marvel, depending on which storyline you're reading, and eventually develops into a hero that has the capability of taking on someone like Wanda. Monica's like, whatever, I'll be fine. I need to go save Wanda. And Darcy's like, I don't think that's a good idea, but you guys go ahead. I'm gonna stay here and keep hacking stuff. So Monica and Jimmy drive off the camp. We're brought back over to Wanda and Pietro walking through the town square, where Pietro makes yet again another intriguing remark and a possible connection to this whole Mephisto dealio, as we hear him say, "Damn it if Westview, New Jersey isn't charming as hell." Emphasis on hell, of course. Another mere coincidence and choice of vocabulary? Perhaps, but I think there was a lot of thought power behind what words are coming out of his mouth, and I'm gonna feel really stupid at this point if this doesn't end up involving Mephisto in some way after all of this. So they pop a squat together, and Pietro ends up asking where Wanda's been hiding all these children up until this point, which was also referred to in a different way in the previous episode where Vision noted that he never sees any children in town. And as Wanda struggles to formulate a response, Pietro rambles on and makes it noticeably clear that he's aware of the situation at hand and the control Wanda has over it, and admits he's impressed, but asks how she's managing to pull it off. Wanda then goes on to explain that she doesn't remember how all of this began, but she just remembers feeling alone and endless nothingness. And as she turns her head to look back at her brother, she sees a zombie-like version of him, riddled with bullet holes in the same places as her brother in Age of Ultron, similar to the zombie-like Vision she briefly saw in episode 3. He asks if she's okay, and she's like, yeah. And he's like, alright, well, that's a big fat lie. Quick cut back over to Darcy, who's hacking away and discovering a file titled Cataract. Now, I've already looked too far into quite a few things in this episode, so why stop now? My quick and simple guess for this would be this is the file explaining why Hayward and Sword are tracking Vision and why they don't want to lose him, as cataracts is a term in reference to losing vision. Get it? Then the tracker informs Darcy, and the rest of the fancy tech tents, that Vision is about to head straight through the barrier of the Hex, and as we cut to outside and see him begin to, he starts to be ripped apart and sucked back into the barrier, and everyone just kind of stands there and watches the show. It was honestly kind of weird. I would have thought for sure they were going to have a bunch of guys in suits try and tackle him down and put him in some sort of restraints, but instead they're like, nah, let's just have him be the first Marvel character to die 3 times on screen. We begin to cut back and forth as all this is taking place, and we see Billy back in town square start to take a hold of his powers, which are akin to Wanda's, and uses telekinesis to stop Tommy from running around because he can hear their father is in pain somewhere. The kids run to Wanda, and Billy informs her of his psychic findings. We jump back to seeing Vision being shredded into pieces by the overwhelming force of the barrier as he makes his best attempt to tell them how the people of Westview need help. Darcy jumps out of hiding to try and get the Sword Agents to do something, but they just handcuff her to a car instead. Smart move! Back to a frightened Billy, confused as to what's even happening to him, who is requested by Wanda to locate Vision. Pietro jokingly throws in, not to worry, it's not like her dead husband can die twice, and Wanda hurls a red ball of energy at him, knocking him off his feet to say the least. The twins are rattled by this. but Wanda urges Billy to focus, and then she pulls the craziest stunt of the show thus far. Her eyes light up red, and with a wave of her hand, she freezes everything in Westview and begins to make the border of the barrier expand. We see Monica and Jimmy, who are driving off to their secret connection, notice the red wall of doom getting closer and closer as they accelerate in hopes of outrunning it, which it seems they will. Most of the sword peeps back at the fancy tech tents, though, not so lucky, as we see multiple objects and people get engulfed in the ensuing wave of cell-changing madness, including Darcy. A helicopter gets transformed into a hot air balloon, an armored vehicle turns into a food truck, and a good chunk of the people running away unintentionally become part of a newly formed circus act for Westview, which is about to become a lot larger based on this DLC pack Wanda's adding. The only people from the base we see to have made it out safely are Director Haywood and a select few other agents with him. The last visual we get of the episode is the red in Wanda's eyes gradually fade away, and then the credits. So there we go. That's the breakdown of Episode 6, All New Halloween Spooktacular. Talk about leaving things on a cliffhanger! At the risk of repeating myself from my last review, they just seem to be stepping everything up a notch just enough as each episode progresses. I love that we got a chance to see Wanda, Vision, Quicksilver, and even Speed and Wiccan in the closest representation of their comic book outfits so far. The banter between Wanda and Quicksilver leads to so many intriguing thoughts and possibilities as to what's really going on and who he really is. I'm sticking with Mephisto as my guess, and getting an opportunity to witness Vision do some investigating into the outskirts of Westview added another disconcerting layer to the already complex nature of the show. I'm sure we're all in the same boat with wondering how far Wanda is going to be extending the barrier of this fantasy world she's created. And also, if Monica does end up receiving superpowers down the line due to her cells being altered going through the hex, does that mean everyone else in Westview has the potential to end up with superpowers at some point? Is that maybe going to create the MCU's versions of mutants? I can't wait to find out, and I can't wait to break it down and review it with you all.